everyone, Tally and Farrell here from Bored of It. One thing we get asked a lot is how a game will play at 2 players. Is it still fun with 2? Does it still have the same feel? Maybe you're only really board gaming as a couple, or just due to the pandemic, your gaming group is a little bit restricted at the moment and you can only play with 2 of you. So we've put together this list of our favourite games to play when there's only 2 of us that are not specifically designed for 2 players. The reason we're focusing on these types of games is because it is easy enough to Google a list of best 2-player games, but it is harder to find information on games that are designed for more players, how they play at 2 players. Is it still good? Is it still fun? So this is the focus of our list.
So we're going to go through these in no particular order, and as we introduce each one, we'll just give a brief description of the game in case you haven't played it or heard of it before. And then we're going to specify what about the mechanics that the designers have designed that makes it as good at 2 players as it would at a full player count. And we'll timestamp this video so you can just go through to games that interest you as well.
So first up is Mariposas. In Mariposas, you'll be replicating the migration patterns of the monarch butterfly across North America as you go collecting flowers and VPs. The reason why Mariposas is great at 2 players is because it's totally solitaire and non-interactive. So whether you have 5 players or 2 players, your personal experience of the game and what actions you take are not going to change. The only thing that might be slightly different is that as you travel, you will uncover city spaces which might give you coloured cards. And if you complete a set of coloured cards, then you get a bonus. In a 2-player game, it's pretty hard to uncover all of those spaces and therefore locate where you need to go to collect the coloured cards to complete your set. Whereas with 5 players, it's pretty easy to uncover those spaces and know where you need to go. That being said, we have managed to uncover all of the city tiles in 1 or 2 of our 2-player games, but it's kind of rare.
So moving on to the next game, we have Brass Birmingham, which is one of the most highly rated games in this list on Board Game Geek. And it's also one of ours and our gaming group's personal favourites. In this, you'll be taking on the role of an industrialist in the industrial era. It takes place in Birmingham in the 1800s, and essentially you're going to be building up transport links and industry. And it sounds quite dry, but it's actually a really great game. It's wonderfully designed, and we love playing it. But why it's good at 2 players is essentially because it's played across a map, the region of kind of Birmingham, the areas around it, the Midlands. And what they do is at different player counts, you have different areas available. So if you play with a full 4 players, the entire map's available. If you play at 3, then you don't get to play at the top of the map. If you have 2, you can really only play in the bottom half of the map. And what this does is it forces, at any player count, players together, and they have to interact like you would in a full game, where everyone's kind of taking everything and there's no space because someone's already there. So if you play with 2 players in the bottom half, the game generally has the same feel as it does at higher player counts because, you know, you're close together, you're stealing each other's spaces, you're getting resources from each other, and so on. So yeah, Brass Birmingham, good at 2 players. Our next game is one that I actually recently bought Tally for her birthday due to her obsession with New York and with animals, New York Zoo.
It's ideal. In New York Zoo, you'll be aiming to be the first one to complete your zoo by filling it with irregular shaped animal enclosures and attraction tiles.
And the reason that this is so great at any player count, but in this case particularly 2-player, is because the core of it doesn't change depending on the players, because it is a race to the finish line. And in a race, only one person can win. There is no second place. And because you're trying to fill up this zoo, it just doesn't feel any different if it's just me and Tally playing, or if you have 5 people competing to fill up the zoo first.
What does change is the focus of the game very slightly between higher player counts and 2 players. At 2 players, your focus will be really on gaining those puzzle pieces and filling up your zoo. Whereas at higher player counts, there's less puzzle pieces to go around and you'll have less choice of puzzle pieces. So it becomes harder to gain the right pieces that you need to fill your zoo. So then the focus will be on gaining and breeding animals to fill up enclosures, which allows you to gain attraction tiles, and they're super handy for filling in all of the little gaps in your zoo.
But yeah, it's a great little quick competitive game.
So cute.
With some charming meeples.
Yeah. And next up we have Lost Ruins of Arnak. In Lost Ruins of Arnak, you'll lead an expedition to the island of Arnak, where you'll be discovering ancient burial sites, collecting resources, and moving up the research track. The reason why Lost Ruins of Arnak is great at 2 players is because even though the feeling of the game does change slightly from 4 to 2, it doesn't change for the worse. You'll have more opportunity to discover new sites at 2 players than at 4, because at 4 they'll get discovered more quickly. But that's not a bad thing, because that's actually one of the most fun parts of the game. Each player also only has 2 workers, and there's always plenty of spaces to go to, so it's not particularly a brutal worker placement at 4 players to 2, so that part of it doesn't change so much. Also, when you visit the sites, you'll be collecting resources, and one of the main ways to get victory points is to spend those resources and move up the research track. And this is an entirely solo endeavour. Other players don't help or hinder you to move up that track, so it doesn't change with the player count.
So, Lost Ruins. Now we come on to Parks, which is one of the most beautiful games we've played. And in Parks, you take on the role of a hiker, hiking down a trail, and you'll also be visiting national parks in America. And this is a game we've really enjoyed. It's really beautiful to look at. And it's classic worker placement. You put your hiker on a site on the trail and you get the resources printed there, and no one else can go on that space unless they use a special token, which you only have 1 of. But why it's great at 2 players is really that the feel just doesn't change if you have 2 or 4 or 5. When we played this at 4, I was really expecting it to be quite different because I thought it'd be a lot tighter on the trail. And to some extent it was, but it also wasn't like hard. I think the only thing that changes is that with more players, you have to be more tactical about where you go, because, you know, it's like, should I wait for him to move so I'll move my other hiker? Or should I just use my token and go there now where Tally is? But at 2 players, you kind of have more freedom to go wherever you want. And that's the only difference, just because there's more space available. But really, because all you're doing is collecting resources and visiting parks, it just doesn't change. So definitely a great couple game, I think, as well, actually, just because of the theme and the beauty of it.
And next up is Viticulture. In Viticulture, you'll be working to create the best vineyard in all of Tuscany via worker placement and the playing of cards. The reason Viticulture is so great for 2 players is because the number of available worker placement spaces per action scales proportionately by the number of players. So in a 4-player game, there'll be 2 open spaces for workers per action, and in a 2-player game, there's only 1. So it still creates that feeling of being quite competitive and quite tight. Also, everything else that you do in the game isn't really dependent on interaction with other players. So this, coupled with the fact that the worker placement still feels quite tight and competitive, means that the game does feel pretty similar at higher player counts as it does at 2. So we really enjoy this one.
So, on to the next game. Now we're going to talk about this big box behemoth that Tali has just managed to bring to the table. Eclipse. This is a game that we've been playing a lot of recently, and I think our last video was actually a review of this. But it's really enjoyable. We really like it, even at 2 players. And it's kind of a generic space game in the way that you're taking the role of an alien civilization. You're trying to conquer the galaxy, or at least become the dominant force, the most powerful. But surprisingly, whereas most games like this don't even have a 2-player option, this has a 2-player option, and it's really great fun. Mm-hmm. So usually in these type of games, all of the interaction and fighting comes from other players. And, you kind of have an empty map and then you have to move out and push together with these players. But here they provide non-player enemies. And, these little aliens, they have differing levels of difficulty. So as you get better and better throughout the game, you can fight the tougher ones. And then towards the end of the game, if you want, you can fight the other players as well. And also, at its core, it's quite Euro-like. You're kind of improving your civilization. Each turn you're being able to get more resources in, to buy bigger and better tech, upgrade your ships with better weaponry and shields and stuff. So all that's quite a solo endeavour as well, for the most part. So the feel doesn't really change too much, actually, if you play it 2 compared to, say, 3 or 4. The thing that might be a little different is I think when you get to like 4 or 5 or 6, towards the end of the game when people build up the stuff and players are pushed more together, there might be some conflicts and some fighting, which you won't get in the 2-player game because you almost take 2 halves of the map. But the option is still there to fight the other player if you really want to. But essentially, it might be a little different, less player-to-player interaction, but it really is a great game, really fun game at 2 players.
Very fun.
And, it might be an expensive way to play 2-player game, but it's more that if you get this because you're going to play with your gaming group, you don't have to worry about having it to play at 2 players because it is really good fun.
So, next game, please, Farrell. It is Tapestry. In Tapestry, you'll be guiding a unique civilization from the early days of discovering fire into the future. In Tapestry, there's a bit of resource management, a bit of civilization building, and a bit of engine building.
And why it's a good game to play at a lower play count is because a lot of what you do, 90%, is kind of a bit solo. You're using your own resources to move up tracks. No one can really interfere or hinder you in any way. And so, this isn't going to change if you have 2 players or 5 players. And the things that are a bit more interactive in this game, such as the exploring new territories or conquesting them, there's actually a double-sided map, and one side is smaller, meant for lower player counts. So you flip the map, and then you're kind of pushed together to be more interactive, so no one can really hide away. So again, it has the same feel as the big map at a higher player count.
So there is less competition to grab the landmark buildings and the achievements, but it is still a race at 2 players.
But one thing to maybe be a little aware of if you do play at 2 players is that some of the civilizations aren't great at 2 players. They kind of involve other players being there, so they might be a bit stunted. So maybe you should actually actively pick your civilizations at 2 players rather than getting them randomly like the game suggests. And in the similar vein, the Tapestry cards are well known for being swingy. So if you draw a Tapestry card that really involves there being a lot of other players around the table, you should probably let the person you're playing with draw a secondary one in place of that card.
Yeah.
But on to the next game, which I believe you have.
Okay. It is CloudAge. CloudAge is a short, streamlined engine builder that plays somewhat similarly to other Alexander Pfister games like Maracaibo and Great Western Trail.
In CloudAge, you'll be in command of an airship and you'll be roaming the desiccated landscape, looking for supplies, resources, crewmates, and trying to battle the evil Cloud Militia.
CloudAge is a terrific little game that we've been really enjoying lately. The rounds in the game are split out over 3 phases, and what's great about it at 2 players is that the first 2 phases you can pretty much take your actions simultaneously, so it cuts out any downtime for either player. Whereas at more players, it is less feasible to take your actions simultaneously.
And carrying on from that, the third phase of the round is actually terrifically interactive, so this also keeps you engaged because whatever action the main player takes, everyone else gets a secondary action from that. So you're always engaged, you're always watching, and at 2 players, because you can play simultaneously and then you're invested in what the other person is doing, it actually becomes a really quick, streamlined game, and the rounds fly by. It's almost preferable in some ways at 2 players just because there's no downtime, you're just really involved the whole time. And because then this makes it shorter, you can actually get a few games in the session.
Yeah, we've been doing that a lot, haven't we? Game after game.
Game after game. One more thing, actually, is that what you do on your turns isn't going to change between the number of players, because you're always going to be, playing cards or moving your ship or whatever. None of these actions actively involve other players until that final phase. So the game, in terms of what you do minute to minute, really does not change in any way at 4 players or at 2 players, which is another bonus for it, really, if you want to play at 2.
Your strategy is not going to change depending on the player count, right? So up until this point, we've been focusing on talking about competitive games, because you can usually assume that with cooperative games, it's going to be decent at 2 players, whereas with competitive games, it's a little more tricky.
So we just want to take a moment to talk to you about a cooperative game we really enjoy, Spirit Island. This is one of the best rated games of all time, and in Spirit Island, you're going to take on the role of a distinct island guardian spirit with unique powers, and you're going to use these powers to repel Imperial invaders from your beautiful island. Down English.
Each player has their own personal area of the island to focus on, so you're going to be getting the same experience at 2 players as at 4. And in the early stages, you really do need to be focusing on your area of the island and using your own unique guardian powers, so it does prevent quarterbacking even at 2 players.
Another great design thing that is part of this game is that a lot of times in cooperative games, the difficulty changes slightly depending on how many players there are, but not in the case of Spirit Island. The difficulty is the same at 2 as it is at 4, so you get the same experience. But the bottom line is this is a really beautiful, charming game, and it's actually a game that we really wish we played more than we do. We don't get the chance to play it a lot, and we do regret it. We want to try and play it more in the future. It's really good fun.
Love it. So next up is Res Arcana.
Res Arcana is another game that we really enjoy, and it's actually one that, out of all these games, we feel is really underappreciated. In Res Arcana, you're going to be taking the role of some sort of magician, like a mage or a necromancer or an alchemist, and you're going to get a unique card to signify this with unique abilities. And your goal is to become the most powerful magician.
It's a card-driven engine builder in which you'll be playing cards to get more resources, to then play more cards and get more resources, which you'll eventually spend into gaining VPs.
So what makes it great at 2 players is that it's a race to the finish line. The first person to 10 VPs wins. So like we were saying when we were talking about New York Zoo, that when it's a race to win, the number of players doesn't really matter so much because only one person can win. And secondly, when it comes to the engine building that Tali was mentioning, a lot of what you do is a personal endeavour. There's no input from other players because you're randomly dealt a deck of cards at the start. You have your own unique magician card, and you combine these together to generate resources, to put more of your deck into play, to generate more resources, to then, start churning out VP. And because minute to minute you're doing this, there's no input from other players, so it doesn't matter if you have 2 or 4.
The player interaction comes from cards and tiles that generate VPs that are available for everyone. So the race to grab the ones you want is going to be feeling the same at 2 players as at 4. There is also a system where other players can attack your resources and you have the chance to defend. But the number of available VP generating cards and tiles does scale with the player count. So the race to grab the ones you want and to get to those 10 VPs is going to feel the same at 2 as it would at 4.
But yeah, I would say if you haven't heard of it or looked at it, it's definitely something to check out. I think it's not that expensive. It's a really good game. I think
always enjoy playing Res Arcana.
Everyone really enjoys it. It's just one of those ones that's kind of gone under the radar, and we think everyone should check out if you like engine builders. Now we're going to discuss the mega popular game Root, which is well known because of its juxtaposition of incredibly cute woodland critters with incredibly brutal woodland combat. In Root, you'll play as a unique woodland faction, and all of these factions are asymmetrical, which then means that whichever faction you play as, you're going to have to find a distinct route to victory that no other faction could do.
For those that know Root, you may find this suggestion a little bit surprising, as it is well known at 2 players to fall a little bit flat. However, we are going to cheat a bit and say root with the caveat of the addition of the Clockwork expansion, which introduces robot AI.
And this robotic AI is incredibly well designed. It really does feel like you have other player or players at the table with you. And this is because of the orchestrated yet unpredictable actions of the robotic AI. And in fact, often when we play at 2 players, the AI will get so powerful, that means Hallie will have to combine to drag it backwards and stop it from getting even more powerful and winning the game. Much like you have to do in Root with a full complement of players.
It's not the most ideal way to play Root, but we can honestly say that we really enjoy playing it at 2 players with the addition of this Clockwork expansion. We know that a lot of people really dig the theme of Root, but will be well aware after some research that it's not really meant at 2 players. If this is the case, then we can say to get Root, but only if you will also get the Clockwork expansion.
Yeah. And we've played a lot of Root. I think it was our most played game since we've been keeping records.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was at 2 players. So it's definitely something we've had a lot of experience with and can recommend.
I want to play it now, actually.
Yeah, so do I, after talking about it.
So we've come to the final game on our list, which is Dune Imperium, the much hyped new game based on the famous series of novels and upcoming new movie, which we're all patiently waiting for. It's a mashup of deck building and worker placement, but it captures the same cutthroat theme as the Dune universe.
So the thing is, with this, you will have to play with an automated AI if you play at 2 players, but it's pretty simple to control. You basically have a deck of cards, you draw one, it tells you where they go, so they block off a worker placement space, and it also tells you if they send any combat cubes into battle. So it does feel much like a 3rd player would in terms of blocking off spaces and fighting you. One thing though is that it's probably a game maybe where it would be better with a 3rd player or a 4th player, just because, you know, there's a lot of scheming in Dune, there's a lot of cutthroat business, and an AI can't really do that. But it also, the feel doesn't really change that much with the AI at 2 players or at 3 players.
The AI will annoy you just as much as a 3rd player really would by suddenly sending twice the amount of cubes into combat as you, or placing their worker in that spot that you really needed to go to next turn.
Yeah, so I mean, thing is, this is probably one of the few games on this list, if not the only one, where I would have to be honest and say that it's probably more fun with the extra players at 3 or 4. Because again, you want to look at someone when you suddenly send 5 troops into battle and steal the victory points from them, or when you play an intrigue card and like do something annoying to them. You can't do that with an AI player. But, you know, really the core gameplay doesn't change and it doesn't feel any different if you have 4 or 2. So, I mean, that's fine. That's the bottom line, right? It doesn't play any different. And also, it is still a tight race between 2 players to get up to that 10 VP mark.
And you're only saying that because you love backstabbing and annoying everyone, don't you?
Yeah, I really enjoy playing this game, actually, and pulling little cheeky moves and intrigue cards. I mean, you can tell them a few stories, right?
So annoying.
But yeah, so Dune Imperium, and I believe we will actually do a review on this in a week or 2, so stay tuned. So that was our list of great 2-player games that aren't specifically designed for 2 players, and we've actually reviewed the majority of those, and the links for that will be down below if you want to know more about them and what we think in detail. 2 of them will be our next 2 reviews, so CloudAge and Dune Imperium are coming up, so if you want to know more about those, please subscribe. And please, if you need any more information on any of them, you can just comment below and ask us.
We also just want to give a shout out and honourable mention to some of our favourite games to play, which are designed for 2 players. So things like Watergate, Twilight Struggle, Imperial Struggle.
I love Imperial
Curious
Struggle.
Cargo. We've been playing that a lot. Curious Cargo we got over Christmas, and it was our little nightcap game. It was very fun. So also let us know down in the comments what are your favourite games to play at 2-player, whether they are designed for 2 players or not.
And please, would you like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video? It means a lot to the Doggos.
They love it.
And it keeps them in food balls. And again, thanks for watching.